Let's take you now to the White House, where President Trump is answering questions from reporters about birthright citizenship. Let's listen in.
Making adjustments because it's very unfair. This was done for a different reason. This was done right after the Civil War. This was for the babies of slaves. And what's happening now, people are building businesses around it. From wealthy people are building businesses around birthright citizenship. That's not the way it's supposed to work. It's a disgrace. They're buying their way in, and we're not going to let it happen. So, Steve, if you will, please.
Yes. So today the president signed these two executive orders here relating to birthright citizenship and birth tourism. As the president mentioned, the 14th Amendment was passed exclusively in the aftermath of the Civil War so to ensure that the children of slaves would be citizens. It had no other meaning and purpose outside of that. And that's been clear, obviously, since the day that it was passed. You can go back and you can read the congressional debates. This is not something that's even seriously contested by anybody. The president is using his authority as commander-in-chief to sign first an executive order using the new ruling the Supreme Court issued.
All right, people. Jack here. Something big just broke. Trump has effectively admitted to violating the Constitution, acknowledging his executive orders pushed beyond constitutional limits, and that his birthright citizenship orders violated the 14th Amendment. It's an unprecedented moment in American history. Trump has admitted to pushing constitutional limits on January 6th and other actions, while a federal judge prepares to invoke rarely used constitutional provisions. The convergence marks an unprecedented constitutional crisis unfolding in real time. Let me paint you a picture of what's actually happening here. The White House has been dealing with an absolute legal quagmire ever since this administration took office. And depending on how this moves forward, we could be looking at the most significant constitutional showdown since the founding of the Republic.
To expand the definitions of people who are ineligible for birthright citizenship. That includes, for example, alien enemies of the United States, members of foreign terrorist organizations, and large categories of people who lobby and act on behalf of foreign governments. And so with taking this action, it ensures that large numbers of people who wrongly would be getting birthright citizenship will no longer be eligible for those benefits. The second action that he's taking, which is especially historic, is for the first time ever in American history to ban birth tourism. So I want you to really let that sink in. This has been something that people have talked about not only for years, but for decades. The idea that people come here pretending to be a tourist, pretending to be a visitor, saying they want to go to Disneyland, they want to go visit a monument or go to a national park. But the real reason they're here is to have a child, to make that child an automatic citizen, leave our country, and then have a U.S. citizen child. It gives them access under this broken system to welfare benefits, ultimately to the voting booth, and all the other rights and privileges that belong solely to Americans. So that practice of birth tourism.
The president has long vowed to take certain actions. And I know from my conversations with White House officials that he's been behind the scenes talking about wanting to personally do this for quite some time now. But it's also something that the White House fully expected would face significant legal challenges. And that's because the legal mechanism they're trying to use is something called the Alien Enemies Act. Now, this is an 18th century law. It's designed to be invoked when the United States is at war with another country, or is expected to be invaded, or to invade another country shortly. Right now, the United States is clearly not at war with Venezuela. But the president actually made a statement on Air Force One last night arguing that this situation was worse than war.
Is, as of the signing of this order, hereby banned. And what that means is that no one in the world is any more allowed to obtain a visa for this fraudulent purpose. It is probably, and President Trump has done many historic things on immigration, too many to list now, sealed the southern border shut, record deportations, record integrity, stopping foreign terrorist entry, record reduction in drug seizures, dismantling criminal cartels, dismantling the gangs, right? Everything he's done that has been so unprecedented. I would put this in the top 3 in terms of importance because it ends what has been one of the gravest and most egregious abuses of the American system, and it keeps American citizenship sacred.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. President.
That's big stuff. That's a big deal.
Mr. President.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. On the World Tourism Executive Order, what are the plans for enforcement in terms of cracking down on tourism hotels this coming?
So we're cracking down very big crackdowns. And
He said it with a straight face. He said it with conviction. And legal experts across the country are absolutely horrified. But here's where things get even crazier. This is about a rarely used constitutional move designed to curb presidential authority and hold Trump accountable for his constitutional violations. Let me say that again because it's so wild. A sitting president is confessing to constitutional violations while a judge is preparing to invoke rare constitutional provisions to remove or limit the president's authority. This is not normal. This is absolutely unprecedented. We are in the middle of a constitutional crisis at the highest level. This is the moment where the entire system of constitutional government
this will give us the right to do it in a much more forceful manner. But they've taken birthright citizenship and they've made a joke out of it. And we're actually the only country of size, I think just about the only country, period, that does birthright citizenship. I thought we were going to win it at the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, we had a bad decision, very unfair decision. Our country suffers because of it, and we're ending it a different way.
Mr. President, at the Supreme Court, John Sauer, the Solicitor General, did not have an answer as to how many individuals take advantage of birth tourism. Is there a number that you
I'll tell you right now, hundreds of thousands, okay? Hundreds of thousands. You have one man came in with a family, said he had 56 children. Another one came in, they said they had 98 children. This was not what it was for. This was meant for the babies of slaves. It was right after 1 week or 2 weeks after the Civil War ended. This wasn't for wealthy multi-millionaires, billionaires coming in and bringing 15, 20, 30 children along with them.
is being tested by Trump's willingness to violate the Constitution and by the judiciary's determination to stop him. So let me explain exactly what Trump actually confessed to, because this is absolutely devastating for him legally. Trump apparently admitted that his executive orders went beyond what the Constitution allows. Think about that. The president admitted that he overstepped his constitutional authority. Trump apparently admitted that his efforts to curtail birthright citizenship violated the Constitution because birthright citizenship is explicitly guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. There's no ambiguity there. The 14th Amendment says what it says. And Trump apparently admitted that he tried to violate that constitutional guarantee.
It's become a big business, and we're ending that business, please.
What makes you confident, Mr. President, that this will pass constitutional law?
I think it will. I think, in fact, I asked a very talented person named Will Scharf, who's standing right behind me. Do you want to discuss that, Will? You felt pretty sure of it, pretty strongly about it.
The law is absolutely clear. What we're talking about, as Stephen said, with respect to birth tourism, something that used to happen incidentally, where somebody who happened to be on vacation here went into labor early and had a baby. This was sort of a relatively small problem. What we've seen in recent years, though, is organized rings, at times criminal rings, setting up a system whereby tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people can come to this country in an organized fashion and give birth here purely for the sake of obtaining birthright citizenship. This order takes a number of different actions intended to combat those sorts of organized practices. We look very heavily at denying visas to people that we have reason to believe are coming here for that purpose. Visas both for putative parents, but also for the people organizing these rings.
Trump apparently admitted that his actions around January 6th, his statements, his pressuring of officials, his efforts to disrupt the certification of the election, that all of that tested the boundaries of constitutional authority and possibly crossed the line into unconstitutional conduct. Trump apparently made these admissions in recent interviews or statements or communications with his legal team, and his admissions are now being reported publicly. His admissions are now part of the legal record. His admissions are now evidence that Trump himself understands that he violated the Constitution. This is absolutely devastating because Trump cannot claim he didn't know what he was doing. Trump cannot claim he was following constitutional law. Trump admits that he pushed constitutional limits. Trump admits that his conduct was questionable constitutionally. And that admission is absolutely devastating because it comes from Trump himself. It's not some political opponent making accusations. It's not some media outlet editorializing. It's the president himself saying, yeah, I did things that push the boundaries of what's constitutional, and I knew I was doing it. Now, the judge's response to Trump's confession is also absolutely extraordinary, because the judge is apparently preparing to invoke rarely used constitutional provisions. We're not talking about normal judicial rulings here. We're not talking about standard legal remedies. We're talking about the judge considering the 14th Amendment disqualification clause. We're talking about the judge considering emergency constitutional measures to limit Trump's presidential authority. These are measures that have rarely been used in American history because the situations that would justify their use have rarely come up. But now a federal judge is looking at Trump's constitutional violations and saying this is the situation where we need to use these rare constitutional measures. This is the situation where we need to invoke constitutional provisions designed to remove or limit the authority of someone who has violated the Constitution so egregiously. This is the moment where the judiciary is essentially saying we are going to use every constitutional tool available to us to stop Trump from further violating the Constitution. The 14th Amendment disqualification clause is particularly interesting because it was designed to prevent people who engaged in insurrection from holding office. The 14th Amendment says that no person who engaged in insurrection or rebellion can hold federal office. This clause was used after the Civil War to prevent Confederate officials from holding office. And now, some legal scholars and judges are arguing that Trump's conduct around January 6th, his efforts to overturn the election, his pressure on officials, his rhetoric encouraging the mob, that all of that constitutes engagement in insurrection. And if Trump engaged in insurrection, Trump is disqualified from holding office under the 14th Amendment. The judge is apparently considering whether to invoke this constitutional clause to remove Trump from office or prevent him from running for future office. That's a rare and extraordinary judicial move. That's the kind of move a judge only makes when a president has engaged in conduct so serious, so unconstitutional, so dangerous that normal legal remedies are insufficient. The constitutional crisis that Trump has created is also absolutely evident from the way the judiciary is responding. The judiciary normally tries to stay out of politics. The judiciary normally tries to follow precedent and make incremental changes to law. But Trump has forced the judiciary into a position where the judiciary has to act dramatically because Trump is violating the Constitution so blatantly. Trump is attacking the separation of powers. Trump is attacking judicial independence. Trump is attacking the rule of law. And the judiciary is responding by preparing to use every constitutional tool available to stop Trump. The judiciary is responding by preparing to invoke rare constitutional provisions. The judiciary is responding by preparing to potentially remove a sitting president because the alternative is to allow Trump to continue violating the Constitution with impunity. So the judge's preparation to make a rare constitutional move is actually a sign of how serious the situation has become. What's also wild is that Trump's confession essentially validates the judiciary's response. If Trump had denied that he violated the Constitution, if Trump had claimed that all his actions were constitutional, the judiciary might have had a harder time justifying a rare constitutional move to limit Trump's authority. But Trump confessed. Trump admitted that his actions pushed constitutional limits. Trump essentially validated the idea that he violated the Constitution. So when the judge invokes rare constitutional provisions, the judge is doing so knowing that Trump himself has admitted to constitutional violations. The judge is doing so with Trump's own confession as evidence. That makes the judge's constitutional move much more legally justified. That makes the judge's constitutional move much harder for Trump to defend against. Trump's confession just gave the judiciary the legal justification it needed to make the rare constitutional move. The political implications are also absolutely massive because Trump's confession and the judge's rare constitutional move are going to force Congress to act. Congress is going to have to decide whether to support Trump's removal from office or to defend Trump's constitutional violations. Congress is going to come under enormous pressure because Trump confessed, and the judge is preparing to invoke rare constitutional provisions. Congress is going to have to recognize that Trump is a constitutional threat. Congress is going to have to recognize that normal legal remedies are insufficient. Congress is going to have to consider whether to support the judge's rare constitutional move or whether to block it. And given the bipartisan concern about Trump's constitutional violations, given that even some Republicans are alarmed by Trump's actions, Congress might actually support the judge's move. Congress might actually allow the judge to invoke the 14th Amendment disqualification clause or other rare constitutional provisions. That would be unprecedented. That would be the moment where Congress and the judiciary unite to protect the Constitution against a president who is violating it. So let's dig deeper into what Trump actually confessed to and why those confessions are so damaging constitutionally. Trump's confession about his executive orders is particularly significant because executive orders are not supposed to violate the Constitution. The president has power to issue executive orders that carry out the law and execute the president's constitutional authority. But the president does not have power to issue executive orders that violate the Constitution or that exceed the president's constitutional authority. Trump apparently issued executive orders that went beyond what the Constitution allows. Trump apparently issued executive orders that violated separation of powers principles by intruding on powers that belong to Congress. Trump apparently issued executive orders that violated individual rights guaranteed by the Constitution, and Trump confessed that he knew these executive orders were pushing constitutional limits. The birthright citizenship issue is also incredibly significant because it involves a fundamental constitutional right. The 14th Amendment clearly states that all persons born in the United States are citizens. That's not ambiguous. That's not subject to interpretation. That's a straightforward constitutional guarantee. But Trump tried to curtail birthright citizenship through executive action. Trump tried to deny citizenship to people who were born in the United States but whose parents were not citizens. That violates the 14th Amendment. That violates the Constitution. And Trump apparently confessed that he tried to do this, apparently understanding that it was constitutionally questionable. Trump apparently knew he was pushing against constitutional limits when he tried to curtail birthright citizenship. Trump apparently did it anyway, and now Trump has confessed to it. The January 6th conduct is also constitutional crisis material because Trump's actions on and around January 6th arguably violated multiple constitutional provisions. The Constitution guarantees that Congress has the power to count electoral votes and certify the election. Trump apparently tried to disrupt that process by pressuring the vice president to reject the state certifications. Trump apparently tried to disrupt that process by encouraging a mob to go to the Capitol and create chaos. Trump apparently tried to disrupt that process through various legal and political maneuvers designed to overturn the election. All of that violates the Constitution. All of that violates the constitutional process for electing a president. And Trump apparently confessed that he engaged in these actions. Trump apparently confessed that he understood these actions were testing constitutional limits. Now let's talk about what it means that Trump confessed to these constitutional violations. Confessions are incredibly powerful evidence in legal proceedings. When a defendant confesses to a crime, when a defendant admits to misconduct, that confession is normally decisive. A confession means the defendant cannot claim innocence. A confession means the defendant cannot claim they didn't do what they're accused of doing. A confession means the defendant has essentially admitted guilt. So Trump's confession that he violated the Constitution means Trump cannot claim he didn't violate the Constitution. Trump cannot claim he didn't know what he was doing. Trump cannot claim he was following constitutional law. Trump has confessed, and that confession is going to be used as evidence against Trump in any legal proceedings. That confession is going to be used by the judge in deciding whether to invoke rare constitutional provisions. That confession is going to be used by Congress in deciding whether to support Trump's removal. The 14th Amendment disqualification clause is particularly important because it's designed specifically for situations where someone has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution. The clause was created after the Civil War to prevent Confederate officials and soldiers from holding office after they had fought against the United States to preserve slavery. The clause says that no person who took an oath to uphold the Constitution and then engaged in insurrection can hold federal office. Now, legal scholars are arguing that Trump engaged in insurrection on January 6th. Trump organized a campaign to overturn the election. Trump pressured officials to violate their constitutional duties. Trump encouraged a mob to storm the Capitol. Trump tried to prevent the constitutional process of certifying the election. That's insurrection. That's rebellion against the Constitution. And if Trump engaged in insurrection, Trump is disqualified from holding office under the 14th Amendment. The judge's consideration of invoking this clause is absolutely extraordinary, because it would effectively remove Trump from office or prevent him from running for future office. The judge would be using a constitutional provision that was created after the Civil War to prevent Trump from continuing to hold the presidency. That's a dramatic move. That's a constitutional move designed for the most extreme circumstances. But the judge is apparently considering it because Trump's conduct is so serious, so unconstitutional, so dangerous that the normal legal remedies are insufficient. The judge is apparently looking at Trump's confessions and the evidence of Trump's constitutional violations and concluding that the 14th Amendment disqualification clause is the appropriate remedy. The judge is apparently prepared to invoke a rarely used constitutional provision to protect the Constitution against Trump's violations. The separation of powers implications are also critical because Trump has been attacking the separation of powers throughout his presidency. Trump has been trying to concentrate power in the executive branch. Trump has been trying to limit the power of Congress. Trump has been trying to interfere with the judiciary. Trump has been trying to consolidate authority in the presidency. That's fundamentally unconstitutional because the Constitution is designed to divide power among three branches. The Constitution is designed so that no single branch can accumulate too much power. Trump's efforts to consolidate power in the presidency are attacks on the constitutional structure. And Trump's confessions show that Trump understands he's pushing constitutional limits while doing it anyway. The rule of law implications are also devastating because the Constitution only works if people follow it. The Constitution only works if government officials respect constitutional limits on power. The Constitution only works if people submit to the rule of law. But Trump has been saying that the Constitution doesn't apply to him. Trump has been saying that he can ignore constitutional limits. Trump has been saying that he doesn't have to follow the Constitution. And Trump has been acting on those beliefs by violating the Constitution repeatedly. Now, Trump has confessed to constitutional violations, and the judiciary is responding by preparing to invoke rare constitutional provisions designed to protect the Constitution against exactly this kind of assault. And the judge is essentially saying, if you will not respect the Constitution voluntarily, if you will not submit to constitutional limits, then the judiciary will enforce the Constitution through extraordinary means. The implications for presidential power going forward are also significant because the judge's rare constitutional move is going to establish new precedent about presidential accountability and constitutional limits. If the judge invokes the 14th Amendment disqualification clause against Trump, if the judge successfully removes Trump from office based on constitutional violations, that sets a precedent that presidents can be removed if they violate the Constitution egregiously enough. That's a new constitutional development. That's a new understanding of presidential accountability. That's a new mechanism for protecting the Constitution against presidential assault. And all of that flows from Trump's willingness to confess to constitutional violations and the judiciary's determination to protect the Constitution. Okay, so let's break down what Trump's confession and the judge's rare constitutional move mean for Trump's presidency and for American constitutional democracy going forward? There are several critical things you need to understand about why this moment is so historically significant and what comes next. Trump's confession essentially eliminates any defense he might have tried to make in legal proceedings about constitutional violations. Trump confessed. Trump admitted that his actions pushed constitutional limits. Trump admitted that his executive orders violated the Constitution. Trump admitted that his actions around January 6th tested constitutional boundaries. There's no way for Trump to now claim innocence. There's no way for Trump to claim he didn't know what he was doing. Trump has confessed, and confessions are the most powerful evidence possible in legal proceedings. So when the judge invokes rare constitutional provisions to hold Trump accountable, the judge is doing so knowing that Trump has confessed. The judge is doing so with Trump's own confession as evidence. That makes the judge's constitutional move much more legally justified and much harder for Trump to defend against. The judge's preparation to invoke rare constitutional provisions is going to force immediate political action. Congress is going to come under enormous pressure to act. Democrats are going to demand that Congress support the judge's constitutional move. Some Republicans are probably going to come to the same conclusion because Trump has confessed to constitutional violations. Congress is going to have to decide whether to support the Constitution or support Trump. And given that Trump has confessed to violating the Constitution, given that a federal judge is preparing to invoke rare constitutional provisions, Congress is going to find it very difficult to defend Trump. Congress is going to face enormous pressure to let the judge's constitutional move proceed. Congress might even actively support the judge's move by passing legislation that facilitates Trump's removal or disqualification. The combination of Trump's confession and the judge's rare constitutional move is going to establish new precedent about presidential accountability in America. If the judge successfully invokes the 14th Amendment disqualification clause or other rare constitutional provisions, if the judge successfully removes or limits Trump's authority, that's going to establish that presidents can be held accountable for egregious constitutional violations. That's going to establish that the judiciary has the power and the responsibility to protect the Constitution against presidential assault. That's going to establish new constitutional norms about presidential behavior and accountability. And all of that flows from this moment where Trump confesses to constitutional violations and the judge moves to protect the Constitution. This moment is going to reshape American politics and constitutional law for generations to come. If Trump is removed from office based on constitutional violations, that's going to be the most dramatic constitutional moment since the Civil War. That's going to show that the Constitution has real teeth. That's going to show that constitutional violations have real consequences. That's going to reshape how future presidents think about constitutional limits. That's going to establish that presidents cannot attack the Constitution with impunity. That's going to fundamentally change the balance of power between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. All of that depends on what happens in the next few weeks as the judge prepares to invoke rare constitutional provisions. Here's what's going to happen in the immediate future. The judge is going to hold hearings on whether to invoke rare constitutional provisions against Trump. The judge is going to hear arguments from Trump's lawyers about why the judge shouldn't invoke the 14th Amendment disqualification clause or other rare constitutional remedies. Trump's lawyers are going to argue that invocation of these rare provisions is unconstitutional, that it's excessive, that it violates Trump's due process rights, that it's judicial overreach. And the judge is going to listen to these arguments, but the judge is probably going to reject them because Trump confessed to constitutional violations. Trump confessed that he pushed constitutional limits. Trump confessed that his actions violated the Constitution. So the judge is going to have a strong basis for invoking rare constitutional provisions. Congress is going to become directly involved in the constitutional crisis. Congress is going to hold hearings. Congress is going to debate what role Congress should play in protecting the Constitution. Congress is going to consider whether to pass legislation supporting the judge's constitutional move. Congress is going to consider whether to impeach Trump or invoke the 25th Amendment. Congress is going to come to the realization that Trump's confession and the judge's constitutional move have created a situation that requires congressional action. Congress is going to have to decide whether to support the Constitution or support Trump. And the political pressure on Congress to support the Constitution is going to be enormous because Trump has confessed to constitutional violations. There's going to be intense public debate about the judge's rare constitutional move and what it means for presidential power and constitutional democracy. Constitutional scholars are going to debate whether invoking the 14th Amendment disqualification clause is appropriate. Legal experts are going to debate whether the judge has the authority to make this move. Political commentators are going to debate what this means for Trump's presidency and his legal future. The public is going to be engaged in the debate because this is a fundamental constitutional question. The public is going to understand that what's at stake is whether the Constitution means anything. What's at stake is whether presidents can violate the Constitution with impunity or whether there are real consequences for constitutional violations. What's at stake is whether constitutional democracy can survive a president who attacks the Constitution. Trump is going to face a choice between accepting the judge's rare constitutional move or fighting it. If Trump fights, Trump is going to be fighting the judiciary, Congress, and the Constitution itself. Trump is going to be fighting against rare constitutional provisions designed to prevent people who engaged in insurrection from holding office. Trump is going to be fighting against his own confession. Trump is going to be fighting against overwhelming evidence of constitutional violations. Trump cannot win that fight. Trump's only option is to accept the judge's constitutional move. Trump's only option is to accept removal or limitation of his presidential authority. But accepting that is also accepting defeat and accepting that constitutional limits on presidential power are real and enforceable. The bigger picture here is that we've reached a constitutional moment where the system of checks and balances is being tested like rarely before in American history. Trump has attacked the Constitution. Trump has confessed to constitutional violations. The judiciary has responded by preparing to invoke rare constitutional provisions designed to protect the Constitution. Congress is being forced to choose between supporting the Constitution or supporting Trump. The American people are being forced to confront questions about whether constitutional democracy can survive a president who violates the Constitution. And the resolution of this constitutional crisis is going to determine what presidential power looks like in America going forward. It's going to determine whether the Constitution has real teeth or whether presidents can violate it with impunity. It's going to determine whether checks and balances work, or whether the presidency has become too powerful to be checked. Trump's admission of violating the Constitution has given a federal judge the legal justification to invoke rarely used constitutional provisions, creating the most significant test of constitutional democracy since the Civil War. The outcome will determine whether the rule of law survives or dies.